We've got more proof that Andrew Berry was cooking on draft weekend.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Play your game. Projecting the Browns' starting offensive line. We'll do that today. The two other players that would have been in play for Cleveland at number 9 overall. And we've got more evidence that shows that Andrew Berry was essentially cooking, if you will, on draft weekend. And that's where I want to start this conversation, because on Sunday night, ESPN aired a show called The Pick Is In, which basically gave like an inside look to the Browns war room, the Cowboys war room, the Eagles war room. And we got some more juicy details about some of the things that went on draft weekend, some of the conversations that were being had, what led to certain teams taking certain players when they did or making certain moves that they did. And for the Browns, that obviously included the move up the board, or down the board, I should say, from 6 to 9, trading back with the Kansas City Chiefs, and then ultimately drafting Spencer Fano. And there was a couple little nuggets that came out of that. I want to start, though, with the fact that when the Browns were on the clock at 9, and we now know that they obviously took Spencer Fano, and who figures to be their starting left tackle, they apparently had a call from Stephen Jones of the Cowboys, and they showed this, where he called him up, wanted to know if they'd be willing to move off of 9, and the deal that they were going to offer was their 2 first-rounders, so 9 and 24 that the Browns had, they would have sent those to the Cowboys for 12 and 20, and Barry basically says, like, not into it, not what we're feeling. Stephen Jones says, what if he threw a 5th-round pick in there? And Barry says, thanks, but no thanks. And so I actually added up the math on the Jimmy Johnson trade value chart, which is an antiquated thing. You know, teams have different ways that they kind of go about figuring out what the value of a certain pick is. But I think at least out here in the media realm of things and fans, we use that as a reference point of what kind of adds up. And so if you do the math on all those picks, if it's just the swapping of firsts, the Browns value is like 2,090. The Cowboys value is 2,050. And so they're short. The 5th-round pick would be a kicker that puts it over the top, just barely. But for Andrew Berry to give up somebody who he thought was potentially have to lose out on somebody who they had at the very top of their board or near the top of their board, their favorite offensive lineman on their board, and Spencer Fano, he was gonna want a little bit more. And I always felt like that was gonna be the case. When throughout the pre-draft process, I know that the Cowboys trade became a popular one, where it was like, trade back with the Cowboys from 6 to 12, and you get 12, 20, and 12 and 20 for 6 and 39. So they give up their 2nd-round pick instead. And that value does work out a little bit better, where it's like, okay, I can see that happening. But I kept doing it where if I was going to make that trade, I had to include like a future 2nd or 3rd. So a 2027 2nd or a 2027 3rd-round pick. And I just thought, like, for Andrew Berry, and you're going to trade out of the top 10 now, there was going to have to be some sort of cherry on top kicker that made that worth your while. And as it turned out, that kind of would have had to be the case, because they didn't want to lose out on Spencer Fano, who was obviously on the clock when they were there at 9 after they didn't take him at 6, and ended up being the guy that they wanted most of all. So it worked out in their favor. But yeah, as I saw this clip, and it's now kind of gone and made the rounds on social media, it was a reaffirmation that Andrew Berry was playing his cards the correct way on draft weekend, because I wouldn't have taken that trade either. Quite literally, or quite honestly, because the value of the trade, the Cowboys are basically getting clowned on social media for this. Like, people think that the trade was completely lopsided, don't know why they even offered it, think that the Browns absolutely made the right call, or Andrew Berry actually absolutely made the right call in not accepting it. And I tend to agree. Like, I couldn't have accepted that trade either. I do think it would have had to include a future day 2 pick for Berry to even consider it. And as it turned out, like, Berry played his cards right, because what happened after that? They took Spencer Fano. That started the run on offensive linemen, because Francis Mauigoa went shortly after that. You had Tyrese Proctor, or Caden Proctor, excuse me, not Tyrese Proctor. He's a Cleveland Cavalier. Caden Proctor. I've been in Cavs mode lately. Caden Proctor went shortly after that. Like, all these linemen started sort of coming off the board, and the Browns were kind of the ones who started that. So, and I always said all along that if they were going to try to get their needs first and foremost, it made sense to go lineman first and get receiver later. And that's how they ultimately ended up playing this thing. But yeah, I found this I thought that this video and this show that ESPN put out was pretty enlightening overall. Definitely gave some added insight into how the war room situation kind of plays out. And specifically, you saw in the Browns war room, Berry on the phones and making different moves and fielding those phone calls and, talking about different offers. And it was just kind of cool to sort of see it play out in real time like that. And so, yeah, I think he made the right call here. Like, I know that the Cowboys trade back was a very popular one, as I said, but it had to be the right price. And I honestly think, as I look back on the draft even further, and this just, again, continues fueling the fire on how solid of a weekend Andrew Berry had, or how strong of a weekend Andrew Berry had last weekend at the NFL draft. I think when he talks about maximizing the value of the picks that they have, I think he executed it perfectly to a T. You were at 6, you traded back to 9, you got future capital while still getting a player that you were considering at 6 anyway. And then, and the top lineman on your board, as that's what they told us, and then you were able to then parlay the picks that you got from Kansas City into, I think the picks that Kansas City gave them actually turned into other trades that they made that netted them future picks for next year in those fourth rounders. Those 2027 fourth rounders, I think, came as a byproduct of different trades that the Browns executed with the picks that they got from Kansas City. So from that standpoint, the A+ for maximizing the value of especially that first pick. And I think Andrew Berry deserves even more credit than he's already gotten for turning down that Cowboys offer. Because again, I know it was a popular thing. I know it, in theory, like you're increasing the placement of where you are on the board from 24 to 20. That offer was laughable, in my opinion. And so to see Andrew Berry sort of, he didn't, embarrass Stephen Jones on the phone or anything. He just said, like, yeah, it's not going to entice us. But I thought it was good. It was cool to see it play out that way. And it affirmed, I think, what a lot of us were thinking, that, like, it's got to be the right offer. You got to get the right price tag. And it likely had to include future picks for 2027 if the Browns are going to pull the trigger on a second trade back. But that was cool to see. The other thing that was revealed in this show was the other 2 players who were in play for the Browns at 9, had they potentially made it there. We will talk about those 2 players coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and that one position you have to fill is still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need to make the right hire. That's a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I will talk to you about Indeed, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need to find the right person and cut through the chaos, This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs, and listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job that premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. So we did find out as well in this show from ESPN who the other players that the Browns would have liked potentially at 6, and they were hoping would maybe at least one of them would still be available at 9, on top of Spencer Fano. I'll reveal those to you. We'll talk about it here, but I do want to remind you real quick about the Everydayer Club, your chance to get Locked On Browns ad-free on the audio side, whatever platform you prefer, plus access to a members-only Discord channel where you can interact with myself and other hosts from around the network. Just go to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com to sign up and learn more. So, on top of that asinine trade from the Dallas Cowboys that Andrew Berry said no to, this show on ESPN also revealed that Berry had 3 players in mind at 6 that they were hoping would be available at 9 in some capacity when they were going to be on the clock again after making the trade with the Chiefs, which was what essentially inspired them being willing to make the trade in the first place, because they knew with 3 players that they really liked in this range on their board, that at least one of them would still be there when they were on the clock again at 9, with the Commanders and then the Saints obviously coming up in the next 2 picks. And so Berry executes the trade. He goes back, and there was a moment where you saw the next couple picks kind of come in, but he revealed when they were sort of deciding to pull off the trade with Kansas City that it was Fano, it was Francis Maui-Noah out of Miami, and it was Jordan Tyson out of Arizona State who were on their radar at 6 that they thought like, hey, if these are the guys we're comfortable with at 6 or 9, we're guaranteed to at least have one of them be there. And as it turned out, the one that was there, or 2, I guess there was technically still 2 there because Maui-Noah was still there. But as it turned out, the guys who were still there, 2 of the 3 ended up making it, and the 2 linemen, and the one that they wanted the most was Fano, and he ended up being the one that they took. But I thought that was interesting because as much as we had heard about, or as much as Andrew Berry specifically talked about best player available and not necessarily feeling like you're crippled by your needs and having to address those, the Browns prioritized and at the top of their board were the guys who fit their biggest needs. It was 2 linemen and it was a wide receiver when they were going to be on the clock at 6. And so I found that kind of interesting. And obviously, ultimately, they went the lineman route and then got receiver later in Casey Concepcion and then doubled down on it with Denzel Boston in the second round. But I just found that kind of interesting that it was the needs that became the top priority and were sort of their listed best players available on their big board. I had shared a lot in the pre-draft process, my feelings on Maui-Noah. A lot of conversations about him maybe having to play guard at some point. So in deciding between those 2, Fano and Maui-Noah, I was happy that I think they got the better end of that by taking Fano over Maui-Noah, and it came out with a better lineman who I think has. Here's what I would say: like, I know there's been a lot of talk about Fano maybe having to be a guard as well and the shorter arms and all those things, but the athleticism is undeniable to the point where, like, I think for sure Fano can make it in this league as a tackle. He may not end up being a left tackle, like we'll see. That's where they're going to start him out. I hope he can make the switch, and I think his athleticism makes him a good chance to make that switch. I know it's a position he played in college, but to stay there permanently. But if he can't, like, I think he can still make it as a right tackle because his athleticism is ridiculous. Maui-Noah, while really, really good as a right tackle, I think he honestly might end up having to be a guard at some point, like a lot of other people have speculated. And so understanding that, I'd rather take the guy that I feel better about his chances of becoming a tackle, because a tackle is a premium position. So I think in that regard, they came out with the better of the 2, in my opinion. And then Tyson, I had a show, I think it was the morning of the draft of round 1, where I said, if they decided to go receiver first and they ended up taking Jordan Tyson, I'd be okay with it. Because I thought Jordan Tyson was the best wide receiver in this class. He was my wide receiver 1. The skill set that he brings to the table. Listen, Carnell Tate, is a great player, but he is kind of there's a very specific role for him, which is that contested catch guy down the field, bigger body receiver who can make those plays for you. Catch the 50-50 balls, all those things. He's not a blazer. He does get open, so he can make some plays. But Jordan Tyson is like the Swiss Army knife. He can go outside. He can go inside. His run after catch, where after he gets the ball in his hands, it was phenomenal. He was just always my guy, aside from the injuries, and I understand why that held maybe him back to a degree throughout the pre-draft process. As it turned out, he still went top 10, so it didn't hold him back all that much. Teams are going to bank on him being healthy in the NFL, and the Saints obviously are banking on that because they're the ones that took him. But I thought it was interesting that he was in play for them at 6, so much so that they were like, let's trade back and see what happens if how many of these guys still make it at 9, and he'll still be in play for us. The fact that he was mentioned, I thought was pretty interesting because it showed us that they were making the needs a priority, but also that they were thinking about wide receiver, not just lineman, but also wide receiver. And that Tyson was the guy in play. And let's be honest, Tyson would have been an awesome story. I loved him, and it would have been cool to have him here while his brother Jalen Tyson obviously plays for the Cavs. You would have kind of fulfilled that great story. So I loved hearing from Andrew Berry in that section of the show that Tyson was in play because he was my top wide receiver. And it does kind of create, like, hearing these things does kind of create, I think for fans like yourself, almost a what could have been type thing. Like, what if they had taken Maui Noah? What if they had taken Jordan Tyson? And it's fun to think about those things. Ultimately, though, like, I don't think you have to have any regrets about the way that this all went down, the way that this was executed, the players that the Browns took. And obviously Tyson didn't end up being there at 9. He goes to the Saints, as I said. But I think fans in general should be happy with how everything played out. And like I said last segment, to me, it was always a better thought process. If you were going to go needs first, if you were going to target those 2 big holes at tackle and wide receiver, it always made more sense to me to go tackle first. And as we saw, the run happen right after the Browns took one, and then worry about wide receiver later, because you always knew that there was this wide receiver class was a deep one, and you could find those talents in the first round, later in the first round, I should say, in the second round. And obviously that's exactly what came to fruition for Cleveland in getting both Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston. And if you want to tell me that, like, getting Tate, I still don't know that Tate's like a true number 1. Some people talked about him as maybe a number 2 wide receiver. I think Tyson was the one guy that you could feel like is a bona fide number 1 wide receiver in the NFL in this class. And so maybe that would have answered that need, but you might have not ended up with 2 guys that you really like necessarily. So I liked the thought process there. I think it worked out for the best, but it was interesting to hear that the other 2 guys that were in play were Francis Maui Noah and Jordan Tyson, and that they still had their minds sort of set on those needs, those wide receivers, those tackles. And another part of this too was I was convinced, again, going back to the best player available argument, that the third player in play was going to be Caleb Downs. Like, that they would have just taken him and lived with it because he's so good, and obviously safety was theoretically a need for this team going into the draft. They even addressed it with McNeil-Warren. So I was convinced that he would have been like the third guy that they were considering if he was still there at 9. He ended up being there at 9, but it wasn't. It was purely offense. It was purely tackles. It was purely wide receivers, and I just thought that was pretty interesting. But again, turned out for the best. I think they played it the right way, getting the tackle first and then getting wide receiver later. It's unfortunate we couldn't have a great Jordan Tyson, Jalen Tyson story here, but I think nobody should have any disappointment in the way that the draft board sort of fell for Cleveland, the way that Andrew Berry, by the way, maximized the picks that he had. All this said, we start looking ahead a little bit. We know there's a lot of new faces here on the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to give you my way too early, before we really see anything out on the field, offensive line projection for the Browns. I'll give it to you next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, where every possession matters. And if you're looking for an even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's right, turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets for getting started. I like using FanDuel during the playoffs because everything I need is right in one place. Whether you're looking for player props or following your favorite stars, it adds another level to the excitement of every game. It's really easy to navigate and makes playoff basketball even more engaging from start to finish. If you're a Cleveland fan, if you're from here, you know the Cavs just advanced to the second round, a thrilling 7-game series. Well, guess what? The odds have changed on them winning the NBA Finals now. They're actually behind the Knicks and the Pistons in the Eastern Conference to win the NBA Finals. The Thunder have the best odds. The Spurs have the second best odds. Go play the Cavs right now, plus 1,800, because I like their odds against the Pistons in this upcoming series. I think they've been battle-tested by Toronto, and they have a really good chance of coming out on top. That's an option for you at FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. So I thought I'd have a little bit of fun here on a Monday, and as we start looking ahead to what this thing could look like under Todd Monken, what the offense is going to look like, who's going to be where, I thought it would be kind of fun to do a way too early offensive line projection. And the beauty of this, too, is like we can do one now, and then we can circle back to it in training camp when we get a better sense of what it's all going to look like, or even, maybe before going into the summer, after we get mandatory minicamp, we get a chance to see the early vision of what the offensive line could be and see how it changes or evolves or where our head's at different points in time. So, and by the way, share yours with me as well if you want to. Jump in the comments section and share it on the YouTube channel. Hit me up on Twitter at Spencito_, whichever you prefer. But it should be fun, sort of a fun exercise here as we just take a quick look at what we think the starting offensive line could look like. And I'm being a little bit bold with my prediction here, but I'm going to start at the tackle spots because those two are pretty easy. I think definitively, barring injury, we are going to be able to say that your starting tackles for the Cleveland Browns will be Titus Howard on the right side and Spencer Fano on the left side. Andrew Berry told us when they drafted Fano, or really I guess it was technically Todd Monken who told us that Fano's going to be their left tackle. He's going to start at left tackle. That's the spot. Titus Howard told us himself that he'd be the right tackle for this team when he signed here. And so I think we kind of always felt that was going to be the case. They got Titus Howard to be the right side. They would probably draft somebody to be the left side. Those two spots seem pretty much guaranteed to be those two players, again, barring some sort of injury. What's interesting behind them is what happens with, like, who's your top swing tackle? Who are the guys that are backing them up? There's been so many injuries on the offensive line over the years, especially to those tackle spots. You're going to know names like Austin Barber, obviously DeJuan Jones. He just had his contract reworked over the weekend to get some guaranteed money, but also make less money in 2026 to save the Browns some cap space, and maybe he finds a role for himself as a swing tackle in this group. So we'll see. But the starters, I think, are pretty much a lock. Then there's Zion Johnson. And I can pretty much guarantee you Zion Johnson's going to be starting at one of the guard spots. I think it might end up being left, but I don't know that for sure. When we're talking about this group as a whole and sort of piecing it together, I think Zion Johnson is clearly going to be one of the starting guards for this team. They signed him to fill one of those roles. It makes sense that you connect the dots there and we all figure he's going to be a starter on this group. It's just a matter of where. And that might depend on sort of how the other two spots up front pan out. Because, and this is where things get interesting, and this is where I'm being a little bit bold, and this is where the hottest competitions are going to come from. Because Elton Jenkins is kind of the wild card here, who they obviously signed from the Packers this offseason. He played center for the Packers last year. Did fine. He broke his leg, and he's still kind of coming back from that, so he hasn't really been out on the field to this point through the spring. But has the ability to play that center spot, but he is better as a guard. And Todd Monken did tell us that he would love to see Elton Jenkins end up at the guard spot. So I think in an ideal world, that's where he wants him to go. Does that mean it's how it's going to work out? TBD. And I don't know that we can bank on that just yet, because it all really comes down to who's going to be starting at center. And that's the interesting question here, because if it's not Jenkins and they want to start Jenkins at guard, then your options kind of go down to Well, is it going to be Luke Whippler coming off that injury at the end of last season, entering year 4, trying to sort of prove himself? Or is it going to be Parker Brailsford, who obviously they drafted in the 5th round this past year, or sorry, just last weekend, and I think they honestly could view as somebody who starts for them. I really do feel that way. I get he's undersized, but there's a common theme with Todd Monken's offensive line in general, in that the guys that he, I guess, brought in to be on his offensive line, or they added, and it's like athleticism, versatility. You see that with all these guys. And I by the way, I misspoke. It's year 3. Or sorry, it is year 4. For Luke Whippler. But it's going to be interesting to see how they view some of these guys, and athleticism is kind of a common theme among all these offensive linemen. Fano sort of starts that, but like being able to get upfield and block and be a little leaner where you can be quick, get to the next level, and not necessarily these like big bruising guys, because Brailsford is a little undersized in that regard. But you know who else was a little undersized? Is Tyler Linderbaum. And he was obviously is one of the best centers in the game and just got a huge payday this offseason from the Raiders because he is one of the best centers in the game. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what that center job or battle looks like. I would not be stunned if Brailsford is the starter, and he's going to be my penciled in center starter right now on this way too early offensive line projection. And then that would allow Elton Jenkins to be your other guard, which I think is probably the ideal situation. But you need the center spot's the big question. And, if you don't have, if Brailsford or Whippler doesn't win the job, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, because it's probably easier to just start Jenkins and then start Tevin Jenkins at the other guard spot, and you feel like you have your offensive line that way. But I'm enamored with the idea of somebody like Brailsford actually carving out a starting role and starting pretty quickly for this team, even though he's a 5th round pick, and seeing how the Browns maybe think through that and go about that. So that's going to be a battle I am certainly keeping my eyes on throughout the spring and into the summer, because that's going to sort of set the tone for what the rest of the offensive line looks like. And so my way too early projection here on May 4th is Fano and Howard at your tackles, Zion Johnson at a guard spot, Elton Jenkins at a guard spot, and then your centers is Parker Brailsford. We'll see how right or wrong I end up being, but that's what I have it at right now. Again, let me know your offensive line projection for the Browns, your way too early offensive line projection for the Browns here at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel in the comment section, or hit me up on Twitter at Spencito_. And if you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Don't forget about the Everydayer Club, your chance to get Locked On Browns totally ad-free, plus access to a members-only Discord channel. That link again, lockedonbrowns.supercast.com, which is in the show notes if you want to sign up or learn more. Also, keep it local. Check out my friends at Locked On Cavs and Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. We'll catch up with Lance tomorrow. We'll get his offensive line projection. Talk to you then, Cleveland.